Good afternoon. He actually said, gentleman in the audience agrees with me. Also, what we are going to do is, instead of making it into a formal scenario, what we're going to do is try and get it to be more interactive. So one, we can wake you up quickly, and we can also, as we've seen in the past sessions, maybe the interaction has been somewhat limited with the panelists. So this gives you an opportunity to have a better and a more in-depth discussion with some of them. If I look at the previous session, one of the interesting things which came up in the previous session, which was highlighted by Mr. Avinash Vashish from Accenture, was that tourism industry was one of the 4 large industries which will be deploying a large amount of skilled or semi-skilled manpower. And so you can understand why this is the first session which is specific to this area which is starting with. If you look at the industry as such, we're looking at nearly 40 million jobs. And one of the interesting things which I read up was that as per the Planning Commission, for every 10 lakh of rupees which is invested in this industry, there are nearly 78 jobs which are created. So you can imagine agricultural industry and smaller one in the manufacturing. So what I'd like to do is, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic to my colleague and fellow panelist here, Mr. Rajiv Kohli. And he can start with his opening remarks. And then as we go along, we will take questions from all of you. Thank you. Rajiv.
Thanks, Abhinav. I just love the way the consulting world and planning commission have thrown out numbers out there on the amount of employment we will have, the investment we will have, because we in the tourism industry would love that love it to happen in reality, but there are challenges out there. And I think this sector is, it's a very critical sector, and I don't think there's any other segment of the economy in the world that can provide as much employment as tourism can, that has as many touch points down to the grassroots level as tourism does. Working in this industry, and I mean, my scale of number of employees I have and Surendra's have are 2 very different spectrums. But I think one of the most challenging things we have in our industry is filling a seat with quality. It's very easy to find manpower. It's very easy to employ people. But currently, the quality of graduates that we have coming out of the tourism and hospitality school isn't up to the mark. The way they are trained, what they are taught, what expectations are set are very incorrect. If I look at my colleague set when I joined the business about 19, 20 years ago, today everyone in the industry who is at a managerial, supervisory or CEO level, they all started as airport reps. Am I right, Sundar? Everyone started working for a few years at the airport. They worked themselves up the ladder. Today, when we interview new graduates out of tourism schools, hospitality might be a little bit different because in the hotel industry, it's a little bit more technical skill-based training. But when we interview students coming out of the tourism schools, they all want to be managers. They all want to travel overseas. They all want to do international marketing. None of them want to start from the scratch. We found that the youngsters today in the industry are burning out a lot faster. They're unwilling to put in the hard work that will take them up. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have as an industry, specifically to India, in my opinion, that tourism is not yet considered to be a career. If the child did not get admission in regular college, if the child did not get something good, put them into a ticketing or travel course. Until we as an industry are able to set the expectations in the social environment that tourism is a very respectable, very rewarding, and a very interesting occupation to get into, we are going to see challenges where the quality of people that we're getting in are not necessarily matching the needs of we as employers. I specifically work in the segment in the inbound tourism industry, and I think my colleagues in the industry will agree that almost 95% of our employees come from small towns and hinterlands and the B or C grade towns in the country. For them to adjust to the needs of our industry has been very hard. And for us to get quality manpower is different. I think challenges are many. The opportunities are even greater. and we as an industry want to focus on this. We do find the Ministry of Tourism and the Ministry of Human Resources trying to focus on that. But until we get the quality of education set more in line what we as employers need, we are going to face a gap.
Thank you, Rajiv. Two takes which Rajiv has highlighted over here. One is an issue of quality. In fact, if you heard our previous panelist also, they to some extent spoke about productivity and quality also, whether it was Mr. K. Venkatraman from the Managing Director of L&T or some of our other previous colleagues. They spoke about the same thing. In fact, questions around the same process were asked. And the second is the aspirational aspect. It's not seen as a key or the first career choice. So people who are left out possibly seek this as an opportunity to get employment. So that is something which we need to address as a cohesive part of the industry. I now request my colleague Surinder to try and maybe throw some light onto it, or possibly raise some of the other issues or answer some of these aspirational aspect of issues if he can, give some suggestions on the same.
Good afternoon, everybody. I completely agree with Rajiv's comments and statements that we do have a dearth of skilled labor for this industry that we are working in, and we do need to educate, enlighten, and maybe increase the awareness that tourism can bring into the country. As a company, we employ over 7,000 people, so and not only in the sector of inbound, but outbound, foreign exchange, corporate, and other aspects. So we definitely look for people who have the skill sets to provide the necessary services and the customer focus that we require. And therefore, as a company, we've started Center of Learning in 2007. We understand that it's a requirement of the industry that we need to train people, and therefore we embarked on this path to open a Center of Learning in 2007. It now operates from 4 regions in India, and we see a very significant growth in the people that come up and ask us about what they can do in this industry. So I think there's definitely a need for skilled set of people who can help us go forward.
Before I move on to Chris, do any of you have any suggestions in terms of what you should do? Because one of the key aspects which is coming out from our discussion is it's not very aspirational right now. So any one of you can try and address that.
We as Indians tend to blame the government for everything that goes wrong. And I tell my colleagues in the industry, we are a very large country. We have an administration which has many challenges. And whether we like it or not, tourism is not a priority. We are the 4th or 3rd largest segment of the Indian economy, about 6% of the GDP. But we don't factor in anything. I mean, the tourism ministry's powers are non-existent when it comes to tourism. They don't control roads, they don't control airports, they don't control visas, they don't control land, they don't control infrastructure. So all they can really do is put on a great face and showcase the country in the best way they can as a marketing body. I think because we as an industry tend to think the government shall come and deliver and fix it, we have stepped back from what we need to do as our responsibility is educate people that what tourism can do. We don't have outreach programs in schools. We don't go out talking what are the merits of coming into tourism. Hospitals do that, lawyers do that, engineers do that, but we in the tourism industry don't do anything which will encourage people to join us. That is our reality, and I think it's going to happen. It is happening in some small pockets. There are a few of us who have set up our own institutes to compensate for the lack of quality in the public sector in education. But we're a large country, and I think if we collectively as an industry, within our industry and externally, like bodies like FICCI, CI, whoever it could be, educate the youth that there are a lot of more careers beyond computers, doctors, CAs. Because that's the only way we will generate employment. It's not going to be from the traditional sectors because we're saturated over there.
I'd like to now throw this thing open to Chris. And Chris, maybe you could address some of these issues in context to how you are managing them in New Zealand, and possibly some suggestions on how the aspirational aspects of this job and government intervention, without government intervention, how can we try and enlarge the scope of this activity? So.
Thank you very much, and thank you to FICCI for the opportunity to be here with you today. It's a great pleasure for me. I had the honour of helping to host the Minister in New Zealand earlier this year, and it was great to hear from him again this morning in terms of some of that aspiration about the transformation of industry and employment in India. I'm obviously no expert on the Indian tourism or hospitality sector, but it's fascinating to hear some of the issues which have raised just now and earlier in the day, which do resonate with me, both in terms of my New Zealand experience and previous experience in the Middle East as well. And that's around the low status of work in the tourism and hospitality area, or in vocational areas generally, and how to combat that, and also the failure of the education system to deliver work-ready graduates. It's a recurring theme that notwithstanding the fact that people might be moving through senior secondary schools or through colleges, they are not coming to industry with the experience, or the skills at least, that they need to get on with the job, and there's a whole retraining process. So those are the sort of issues also that New Zealand has actually grappled with over a number of years. I think if I can just put a little bit of context around the New Zealand environment in terms of tourism and hospitality. Tourism is an enormously important sector within the New Zealand economy. It's actually the second biggest earner as an export. And I think perhaps one of the strategies you might want to think of from a political level is that our Prime Minister has actually chosen to be the Minister of Tourism, which I think indicates to some extent the importance of which that role and that part of the economy has within the New Zealand context. So I don't know if that's something you can suggest to your government body. Because of that importance with the economy, obviously the tertiary education sector also plays a significant role and has a high priority in terms of tourism and hospitality training. I come from a polytechnic, Whitireia Polytechnic, one of 18, that all of which deliver programs up to degree level, many of them up to degree level in hospitality and in tourism across New Zealand. About 300 or more programs altogether across that whole sector group. So it's a very strong part of the public sector vocational education training group, and there are a wide range of private providers in that tourism and hospitality space as well. So it is a core. So I think we're struggling less possibly with the challenges that my other panellists have talked to about attracting people into that industry, because I think over the last 10 or 20 years it has been seen as a strong industry which has got a future. And particularly, even though it's a relatively dispersed industry within New Zealand, as it is, I understand, within India, there's a lot of small operators, but the expectations in terms of skill level and service level in those areas are still very high in New Zealand, and that's where the training, the vocational training comes in. And in fact, it's more important because it is a service area. There's probably no area is more purely a service area than tourism and hospitality, and that comes down to people, and that comes down to the success of that business is obviously dependent on the quality of the service that's provided by those people. So what we've done in New Zealand is there's a very strong industry link. So coming back to the theme here, which is around the link with industry, in tourism and hospitality, just as in the other vocational areas within the polytechnic sector, our whole governance structure was reformed recently to bring more industry and commercial players into the governance of our institutions, our councils, our boards. So that helps to influence the way in which our programs are delivered. In all our major curriculum areas, there are advisory committees which draw together experts from that particular area in our region that help to inform the curriculum and the way it's delivered. And there's a lot of emphasis too on work placement and practical experience. In my own institution, one of the areas that we offer in is adventure tourism and ecotourism, which I suspect is an area that has huge potential in India as well. And and the high quality of the standards there in terms of health and safety, customer service and all the rest of it is something that is delivered through the education system. So in terms of lessons for that or opportunities for that in the Indian context, from what I hear from my panellists here, I think what New Zealand or the New Zealand experience has to offer is that the quality of the curriculum and the intellectual property and the course materials and the content is supremely important in terms of the student product that comes out of the end of that process. And I think also the quality of the training and the individuals that are put in front of the student body and how successful they are. So I think without knowing too much about the training environment here in India, the comments that I've heard suggest that there's a lot of progress that could be made in terms of both the curriculum and the training quality of the trainers in that sector in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Question for you, Surinder, I would say, currently, because you are handling a lot of inbound and outbound, currently there are nearly 114,000 hotel rooms spread across various hotel categories. And apparently there's 150,000 rooms short of what is required. That also means that there's a large workforce requirement to, take care of these 150,000 rooms. So in your opinion, and because you're a global company and you're working across various countries, what is the suggestion that you have, or what is the knowledge that you can share with us from your experience in other countries on how possibly these things can be, taken care of?
See, we definitely have a shortage of room or the bed nights in the country if you look at overall. But coming to the specific metropolitan cities, I think today we have a certain number of hotels and bed and breakfast establishments which will come up. Having said that, we do require the workforce, which is important for providing the customers the services that they expect. I think the government and as private bodies, we also need to educate people about, coming up and taking tourism as a profession. And that's how we encourage within our employees. We ask them in case they can bring any of the students or any of the people that they know of who would like to be interested in joining the tourism industry. We'll be happy to train them. We'll be happy to provide them service, get them into the service sector. So I think that's an effort that we try to do from our end. And similarly, if we have such suggestions coming in from the other sectors, it may help overall in other sectors also.
Question for you again. Is there a formal training program that you have, a curriculum that you have, which can be implemented across the country, with various partners who are sitting out here, could venture with you and do a joint curriculum and actually implement it?
See, as we speak, we have two kind of training programs. One, which is for this already people who are engaged in the industry, and two, for the people who are interested to come in. So the Center of Learning centers that we have encourage people to join, and we also provide them opportunity as an employment within the industry wherever we can. We also absorb up to 20 and 30% of the students within the organization into different sectors that we have.
One of the interesting things that we had seen earlier with your colleague from New Zealand, Clive Jones, had mentioned his company's interaction with CMC. They have a JV with them, where they've launched a construction course, and top 5 construction companies are practically underwriting the employment of anybody who goes through that 9-month course. So do either of you think that is something that you can also do as part of that industry?
I think one of the biggest challenges we have in our industry is career progression can actually be very slow. And there are a lot of institutes out there offering courses. The quality is an issue, and I don't see why not. I mean, it's an interesting model, and I think we have enough players on our side of the tables who are willing to cooperate with each other. We all realize we are competitors, but we also realize there comes a point in which competition and cooperation crossover. So I think it's a fairly reasonable idea.
No, I think I agree. We have to tie up with various bodies who can actually engage people from different aspects of the industries, and we can therefore increase our workforce tremendously.
Thank you. Chris, any words of wisdom?
I think the model that you spoke with before, it was actually Rick Eade from Unitech that is into that, is got a lot of potential, and there are other similar ones as well. It does, as I said, require an element of industry cooperation and collaboration, and that can be challenging, I appreciate, in a competitive environment. But I think it seems to me that there does, from what has been commented, that there does need to be quite a sea change in terms of the role of tourism in this country, in terms of how it's seen both from the students, their parents and so forth, and the government. And so it probably is important that the industry itself can be seen to be working together to try and tackle those challenges that they face.
Great. I'd like to thank all my panelists and thank all of you for a patient hearing. And I'd like to throw the house open for any questions that you may have. If you just raise your hand, she'll get the mic across to you, and then you can address the question to any one person that you want. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah.
And I am a part of a skilling company called Lok Bharti. This question is for Mr. Kohli. While hearing him, he mentioned that, when you take in people, they're not of the quality. But when I work with companies, and I keep going to companies, none of them seem to have any standards for what is to take in. In fact, different departments have different standards. So, is your company following standards which can be taken in and, let's say, emulated across and used?
I think it's of that organization and what they want to project to their end customer. Specifically for my segment, which is the inbound tourism community, which accounts for the earnings of the foreign exchange and tourism into this country, we are striving for a quality of a person who can deal with an international client. Now, I do not mean to equate quality by where that person comes from, what has been their upbringing, what has been their education, because quite frankly, where you studied, what you studied is fine only until 2 years into your career. After that, it's based totally on merit. I think there's certain basics that our industry needs, and no matter which company we are, what standards we keep for hiring people, those very basics are not being met. So it's beyond just talking about only quality, as in, is this person, is he able to carry a Gucci or a Prada, or is he able to carry something much cheaper than that? But it's just the mere basics are so far off right now. They're just so far off. That in itself is very alarming. So I may have high standards for the people I employ. That might be an anomaly in the industry, but if I look at my colleagues, and I am an officer of our national association, so I interact with my membership base across the country in all different segments. The very basics of what we are getting into the workforce is just very way off. So it's not even a matter of what my standards would be. It's a matter of we're not even getting what the basic standard is needed. I hope that sort of answers what you are saying.
Any other questions? Yeah, lady over there.
And I also run a training and development firm, just getting into vocational skills at the moment. My question actually is that, we're talking about some basic skills that are lacking at this point in time. Can you kind of name them? What are the 2-3 top things that you look for in people that need work on?
What Rajiv and I look after, the basic requirement that we have is that the person should have language speaking skills. I'm not saying English only, but we're also talking of foreign languages. So I think that's a basic requirement to the country or the region that we are catering to. Beyond that, we also look for customer focus. You either have it or you don't have it. It's as simple as that. So we do look into such basic requirements of language speaking. The team or the staff has to be presentable, and he has to have a customer focus.
Great. Thank you.
Sonal, I think, I run a fairly well-known brand in our segment. We've been around for a long time. And in all my years, I haven't had one institute, government or private, come and ask, what is it you're looking for? Everyone is churning out things based on what they assume we're looking for. And that's where the disconnect is. Nobody's come and said, tell me, what is it, why would you hire somebody?
Thank you.
Chris.
If I could just make a comment there, again, from a New Zealand context, and going back to my earlier argument about the industry working together, I mean, one of the fantastic initiatives that New Zealand took many years ago was developing a program called Kiwi Host. And this was something that was done with industry, with government, and so forth. And it was a program that was purely around excellent customer service skills, about being a great Kiwi host. And those sort of skills, and hundreds of people involved in the hospitality and tourism industry in New Zealand, which I know hundreds doesn't seem many by Indian standards, but by New Zealand standards, a large number, a high proportion of people who are involved in the industry have gone through that. So it was a standard qualification or a skill set that was developed by all of the people who were involved, all the stakeholders in the industry, and proved to be a really successful exercise.
Thank you. Okay, one last question over there, please.
Tried tying up with any institute which is specializing in tourism? I'm privy to the fact that University of Mumbai has a tourism course through Garware Institute, and I keep hearing about excellent placement. I'm not involved there. But have you, as a company, ever sort of looked at, giving this kind of a brief to these types of institutes?
Capacities of working in associations in the industry. If I talk about myself specifically, we set up our own institute last year. We saw the gap. It's still a fledgling enterprise, but we saw the gap. I mean, that's the reason that some of us, like Surinder, like Kyoni, and 7, 8 of us have set up our own institutes. Apart from a desire to get the right people out there, there's all an opportunity to make money. And one of the problems we have in our country, we look at education as the holy cow. How dare you make money off education? If you look at the Western examples where education has been successful, it has to be a for-profit economic activity, because that will create quality, that will create competition, and that will generate demand. As long as we look at education as it has to be cheap, it has to be simple, cannot do anything, it's stuck in a certain hole. So a few of us in the industry have started our own institutes. That again is a small dent in a much, much larger issue, because our Delhi, Bombays, Calcuttas and Madrasas do not represent where we are getting our workforce. The ministry, the government of India, Hunar Se Rozgar scheme has a very strong focus on tourism, extremely strong focus, because they know tourism perhaps is the only industry in this country that can generate the most semi-skilled and underskilled employment in the country. We're not looking at only highly skilled. And I know the hospitality industry is very strongly engaged in that, because it's easy for them to bring in these students and these young people and train them in their unit hotels across the country. 2 months, we get placement officers asking. My company has sort of stopped hiring fresh graduates. We may take 1 or 2 trainees a year, but because we're hitting a wall and they don't last, they don't stay, it's become a little discouraging. And when times are tough, especially for our industry where we are under stress from international economies, you have to be prudent in what you hire.
With this, I'd like to wind up the session, and we'll move on to the next one. I'd like to thank Rajiv, Surinder, and Chris for their time, and I'd like to thank you as a patient audience. Thank you very much. And we'll now move on to the next session.